Hey, this is The Rest with Joel Kovacs, the rest of my thoughts, the rest of our church, and hopefully the rest of our souls if we get a little loved. And disclaimer, this is not a sermon. This is a podcast. And these are my thoughts and interests, and these are your thoughts, the rest of you, your thoughts and interests. The rest is a time for open and safe opinions, dialogue, and anything else that comes up. So today we have episode 16 of The Rest, and I've got my friend and one of our church partners here, Kenny Sipes, with me. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here, buddy.
Yeah, and I've known Kenny for a long time. We might tell some of that story, and it's fun enough. And so, yeah, we're going to, I'm going to do a little recap because it fits in with the theme at our church right now. We just finished 3 different episodes specifically related to mental health. And so if you missed those, catch back up on those. But also we're in a season of serving at our church. And so we're doing a series called Servanthood right now, where week 1, I kind of unpacked my heart and the disposition towards servanthood. And then we have some of our partners coming in and speaking, which actually I should have thought next time you're going to speak.
Okay.
Next time you're going to be one of our speakers. Yeah, you will. And but we brought in a new partner. Did you hear Roy?
I did not.
Yeah, so we had Roy Hall Jr.
Oh, yeah. Roy Hall, yeah. I'm thinking Roy Whipple.
No,
Like,
Roy Hall spoke this weekend.
Oh, yeah, I did hear that. It was awesome.
Yeah, and so
terrific.
Yeah, so he spoke, and then we have this coming weekend. So this episode comes out after this will happen. So if you're listening to this, it will have been, a couple days ago. We had Mitchell Elson, and we'll have Mitchell Elson, who is, man, dude, I can't wait for you to get to know him. He's a newer partner as well, and he's amazing. Just for anyone listening, partnership at our church with serving is we partner with organizations that are doing things that we're not doing in places that we can't really do them, which we believe is kind of it's the heart of the mission of the gospel, and it's really outlined in the book of Philippians as Paul talks about his partners and people that gifted him. Just with the beginning of the church, it makes sense. You have the people that go out and they're doing things in different places. Then you have the local church, and there really is quite a connection that's made between local churches and people that are doing mission field work.
Absolutely.
In our day and age, a lot of it is like, some of the language is like parachurch, like they kind of come alongside the church, do different, maybe specific tasks,
right,
in specific areas, but always focused around restoration and the gospel and bringing life and beauty and righteousness and justice into people's lives, which is what we have our partners for. And so we have already an established grouping of partners that have been official partners, which Kenny is one of them, and we'll talk about that. And through the series, we're adding a couple more, and that's why Roy spoke, because he is the founder of the Driven Foundation, and he talks about that this weekend. Yep. So if you didn't hear that, it's really great. You can check him out. I think it's called thedrivenfoundation.com.
Yep, great message.
And great message. You can watch it on the app or the website, and he talks about servanthood, and he runs an organization that feeds, like, I think 4,000 families a year.
That's awesome.
Something like that.
Sure.
And he talked about it differently. He talked about the amount of food they've given since the creation of the organization, which was like some 1 million pounds of food or something like that, which is amazing. But I think it's just lots and lots of families all year that are taken care of. And it might be like 4,000 meals for hundreds and hundreds of families, something like that. But It's really great. And if you want to get connected directly with Roy, you should, because he's doing great things. So we'll jump into just a moment here of the footnotes from my first week talking about servanthood. So this is footnotes. And of course, Kenny, you can. I want you to dive right in here.
Yeah.
And footnotes is just a moment where I kind of talk about a little bit more. So as I laid out this picture of servanthood, I unpacked a little bit of Mark 10. Mark 10 is where the disciples come to Jesus and say, "Can we sit at your right hand and left hand when you are glorified?" So what they mean is when you sit on the throne in Jerusalem, like the king, like so wherever Herod was sitting, when you sit there, can we be on your right and left? And Jesus kind of goes, you don't really, he goes, can you drink the cup and experience the baptism that I'm going to be baptized? To which they're kind of like, yeah. And he's really saying, can you go through what I'm about to go through and die and be crucified? And then they're like, yeah. And he's like, well, you will actually die, but the spots next to me when I'm in glory are already determined. And what he's alluding to is when he's crucified on the cross and how he's going to die a sinner's death in process of serving. So he's saying, you think glorification means that I'm going to be elevated on a throne. But actually, when I say glorified, what I mean is my kingdom is different. And so we don't put ourselves up on thrones and rule over people. We put ourselves up on crosses to do the things that are necessary to serve people. And so I'm going to go to the cross because y'all need me to go to the cross. So whoever becomes the least will become the greatest. So I'm going to serve you. And then that is really the model of what it means to be in the kingdom of God. So Jesus then goes on to say, take up your cross daily, which he doesn't mean literally die.
Right.
He means become a servant. And that is what it means to be part of the kingdom of God. That's what my power is utilized and dispensed for. I give myself. And so there's a connection. I talked about the connection between the cross and the kingdom. We think of kingdom and throne. Jesus wants us to see there's a connection between the cross and the kingdom. The cross is the picture of what it looks like to be in the kingdom of God, to serve.
Yeah, I think, when you're talking about mental health in the last few weeks. I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous almost before you were born. So I've been sober a long time.
And Kenny's one of those guys, if you're watching on YouTube, he is way older than he looks.
Appreciate that. It's got to end someday.
Way older than you look.
So I got sober in AA, and that the whole philosophy at AA is based upon servanthood, right? I mean, it's you want to get happy, forget yourself. If you want to stay sober, your process by which staying sober is to help others.
Yeah.
The more you're invested in helping people find sobriety and mental health, the more likely you are to stay sober yourself. Now, you got to do personal inventory and those kind of things, which is much like in faith, having, different moral clauses in your life and spiritual direction and spiritual disciplines. And, you have those, but ultimately you have those so that you might be participating in ways to help other people. And, so like when I finally got saved, a decade after I entered Alcoholics Anonymous, that transition was easy because that kind of servanthood was placed in me. And as you've known since we've known each other, that has been my heartbeat. So it's always kind of been like the core of my faith. That's the way I exhibit it. That's the way I experience it. That's the way I find most joy in it. And I think that's where I find the most usefulness in my own life.
That's really interesting. I appreciate the tie-in to mental health. So an alcoholic, and then the 12 steps are, so they're kind of like the spine of them is, would you say it's servanthood?
Like the first three is like admitting, basically surrendering and finding a higher power.
Okay.
4 through 7 are about spiritual development, basically. You're writing an inventory and then you're addressing your character flaws. 8 and 9, you're making amends to the people that suffered under your addiction. And then 10, 11, and 12 is living in this experience of being involved in other people's lives, maintaining your activeness in Alcoholics Anonymous so that you might be a beacon of light to people that need sobriety.
And so that becomes kind of the capstone of the whole process, or that becomes the manifestation of health.
Yeah, I would say manifestation. The 10, 11, 12 is like you should be living in that all the time.
Okay.
And then the rest of the steps should be someplace in which, and I feel like step 1 is, surrendering your life, admitting you're alcoholic. And I think faith is a lot like that. Sometimes you just, faith is just like, I need to just go simply back to the cross, or there's Easter and there's that moment where we just need to all address how beautiful this is and the sacrifice that came with it.
Yeah.
And I feel like the 12 steps in AA have that kind of principle in place. Is kind of like sometimes you, no matter if you've been sober 20 years, you got to go back to step one and realize like your powerlessness over this thing and how God delivered you from it. And you might just need to take some more personal inventory because maybe you got, rested on your laurels and got comfortable, and you need to address those things so you don't enter into a place where you would relapse.
Yeah. The picture of the cross and Jesus becoming the servant of all, right? Because he says at the end of that passage, it's the famous, I give my life as a ransom for many. I didn't come to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. So when he's on the cross, he's doing that thing that only he could do, right? He's the perfect Lamb of God, and he's giving up his life and his blood and defeating the powers and darkness, and he's taking on that fight. And he kind of says, like, to his disciples, you want to be with me, you got to kind of do this same thing. And you and I have always, and you've always, I've never said this to you. Maybe I have, I don't know, but I don't think I have. You have a particular, I would call it like a beef with pride. Like you've said to me, it might even be like part of our story that like when I was some arrogant kid coming into your office, and I'm maybe, I think that you were always like keen on understanding pride. And I think that you had revealed to me in many different interactions that it was because of something that was on your radar, something that you were personally sensitive to. So what are your, like, when we think about kingdom and pride and serving, like just give me your thoughts on how that works for you.
Well, I mean, kingdom for me is just, I want to make this place, is if I'm functioning on earth, I want to make it as beautiful as possible for everybody that I have an ability to impact. I think pride, I think I have to fight that every day of my life. At the same time, there's a lot of that was built into me in the DNA in AA, so, humility is a big character thing that you would want to stay sober. And so, I never really strove for leadership. I never strove to be in charge. And all of those things kind of fell into my lap. And
which is exactly what is happening in this Mark 10 passage, because they're coming and saying, can we go to the top of the hierarchy? They wanted influence. They wanted position. They wanted notoriety.
Yep. And that's, probably this part of my soul does, but at the same time, like,
of course,
I'm involved in 3 entities and what we'll talk about soon. And I have to call my lawyer to know what I'm supposed to call myself because I don't care about titles. It's
right.
I just want what we do to represent itself.
Yeah.
And an executive director or president or manager doesn't really mean anything to me. It doesn't really hold any weight. It doesn't add to who I am. It doesn't change the way I operate. So, some of that stuff just isn't important to me because I feel like, my job is to honor the beauty of Christ. So let's just do that. And the rest can be called whatever it's called.
But you didn't just show up there.
No, not really. But I think AA really drove that in. So
AA.
Yeah.
Tell a little bit of the backstory. I mean, how did you end up in AA?
Oh yeah, I was just I was a teenage drunk, and I was an only child that got hooked on drugs and alcohol, and it really affected my family. I was kind of infamous in the
family you were in, or the
my
family
mom and
that
dad.
you had.
Yeah, just my mom. Just that. They didn't know what to do with that, and they didn't know how it had happened since they're teetotalers, and they would never be involved in that. And it got to a place where I was dealing drugs in high school, and eventually my parents.
You were dealing drugs?
Oh yeah. Whatever I had, lots of pills and stuff. It was the 80s. And, yeah, so eventually my parents, the only option they felt they could do is press unruly charges against me. So I got held at the school policeman's car, and then the Columbus City Police came and picked me up and took me to an alcoholic treatment center.
In high school?
Yep, I was senior in high school in November.
And your parents called the cops on you?
They did. Yeah, I mean, it got in bed. I'd moved out, kicked out about 10 days before that, which is really traumatic. I mean, only child, great family, middle class family. I mean, I was the only flaw really. And then to really get into a physical fight with my father, who's like the kindest, most beautiful soul on the planet, was kind of the last straw. And I think my parents saw that I was headed to a quick grave unless they did something drastic. And that in that time, in-house inpatient alcoholism treatment was huge. I mean, I went to an adolescent treatment center, Talbot Hall at St. Anthony's Hospital, which is OSU East now. And I mean, I was in there. The standard process was 5 days of detox and 28 days of inpatient therapy. And
that's what you did.
About 28 days in, it was Thanksgiving break, and somebody snuck in LSD into the treatment center, and a good portion of us broke every rule there was by doing that. Mm-hmm. And so I got extended a 7-day stay, and there's a lot to tell about that. But I mean, two things I would say is, one, I remember before we got caught how miserable I was, and I kind of had a moment of sanity to I never want to feel this way again, but I was stoned as could be at the moment. And so
you mean when you were in treatment and you were on LSD and nobody knew it?
Yeah, right. So I was like, this is terrible. Like, what am I doing? But I was stoned, so there's no guarantee that I'm going to own that moment of sanity when I'm not stoned. And the next day, everybody got caught. And I sat in the office of a woman named Sister Lucille Martin, incredible woman. And she was in charge of the unit. And she said, we're going to have to send you to a detention home. And I said, well, if you send me to a detention home, then I'll commit suicide. And the fact I'm dead will be your fault. And this is a conversation we had for like 2 hours. And, thanks be to God, I walked out of there. I never drank again. That was actually the last time I ever used any substance.
So what happened? Did you go to the detention?
I did not. She extended my stay for 7 days, and then my counselor said, you'll never make it sober ever. You're not of that type. And I got active in Alcoholics Anonymous right away. Had a sponsor who was like.
So was that moment, that 2-hour conversation, was that lady helped you turn the corner?
I think in that moment I was exasperated and meant every word, and I don't know. I just, I think the beauty of that story, and this is a whole other podcast we can have.
It's good.
Is I got married about I got married about 8 years later. And that woman, that sister, that nun came through my receiving line, and she said, hey, it feels like my own son got married today.
Wow.
And you just think of like the weight you put on that. I put on her in that moment with my parents who are dying inside, all of the money they invested in the insurance that it would cost to treat me. And I blew it. And then I'm threatening this. And then we got spiritually healthy enough and sober long enough for that kind of experience to occur.
Wow. This is just my personality. How did you start on drugs? What led you? What happened?
I think, I was, in today's society, we just didn't have anti-anxiety meds and all those kind of things that weren't something we really talked about. Mm-hmm. So I think, for me at that time, I was a super anxious kid. I mean, super aware of over aware that anybody was paying attention to me. Like the kid that tripped in school and assumed that everybody just announced
laughed
it.
And talked and
Kenny Sykes just tripped down the hall and everybody see that. That's the way I felt. And so when I had my first few experiences with alcohol and it kind of eliminated that emotion, that
you got hooked.
Who cared? I was hooked.
Yeah, I got you.
And then I just have this obsessive personality, so I'm going to do everything I get my hands on. So the prettier the pill, the more I would take it.
What a story, man. Okay, so you go through that process, and then after that, you go through the 12 steps after the treatment.
Yep. So after treatment, then I just got sober in AA. I mean, my goal was 90 AA meetings in 90 days, and I did that. I pretty much went to an AA meeting probably pretty much every day of my life, well into getting married. So probably for about 10 years, I was in an AA meeting, sometimes 2 and 3 a day. It was my community, and it was awesome. It's really honestly the why I know Columbus, because I just would go to any AA meeting, so I knew everything from Dublin to Zanesville, because I got lucky. I was 17 years old when I got sober, and I stayed sober, and it was kind of an anomaly at the time. Most kids just eventually relapsed or went out. And so then I kind of got on the speaker circuit. So, then I would end up speaking all over the state of Ohio. And I got to know, Central Ohio simply because I was, offering up a story that I hope that could help other people at the time. That's great, man.
Wow. So you see, it's amazing. I guarantee, the programs that you went through, obviously with Sister Mary, whoever it was, Sister Mary Clarence is what I want to say from Sister Act.
Sister Lucille, forgive me.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. But there's a faith background, and I get the 12 steps. I don't know the history of. It has to be obviously some clinical psychological work there in terms of how people grow and change, and it's all scientific that way. But then that faith piece of what really ties it up and helps people move forward is a servant piece.
Right.
And so I guess, I want to pick up with servanthood and talk a little bit more about your story, both from the faith-based working in church and how that all happened, and then also into what you're doing now. And now you're one of our partners. But before we do that, we need to talk about a couple things that are probably more important.
Are we still in footnotes?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
So it's like this is just what happens.
I don't know the process.
It's okay. It's very loose. Like it can go way off bad. The next thing is you're the aficionado, and we'll play some music for that. But in the meantime, actually, let's just go to that. This is all about Kenny being our representative of servanthood and partner here. Here we go. He's the man. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the Buckeyes.
All right.
In sports. Like, we have to take a minute.
Sure.
So Kenny and I, gosh, see, this could just...
When it started.
My goodness. Kenny, so I worked at the same church that he worked at. I was hired in to be a music director, music worship leader in a Southern Baptist church that had multiple worship experiences, different genres of music. And I was the hip, edgy,
rock and roll,
emerge. And Kenny was the student director.
That was me.
So this is how we first met. I got there in 2007, fall of 2007. So just give the brief history of time. You went from Alcoholics Anonymous, and then just give the skimmed version to get to
really
Jersey.
Let them know how old I am. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I got married in 90, got saved in 96, and at that time I was running a record store in the inner city for about 10 years, and then went into ministry as kind of a byproduct. Two things: I got saved, and then I really loved students. I started coaching Ethan's baseball team when he was about 7, 8. And I was just really effective at it. I wasn't incredibly gifted at, skills, but I was good at human beings, and it kind of like paid off, and people noticed, and kind of got recruited to the church. There was a fight. They used to bring a lot of inner city kids to the church, and there was a fight.
What church?
At Jersey.
Oh, at Jersey. Okay.
And Horace at the time asked me to come in and volunteer because I worked in the inner city. He's like, "Oh, you can help.
You can help."
And Belgium, and he's so sweet. Yeah. Belgium guy, and just
he was the student director.
Yeah. So he said, "Hey, could you come volunteer?" And I did. And not long after that, the main youth pastor, Mark Simpson, left, and there came an opportunity. I'd been
99 or something like that?
No, this is 2003.
Okay, 2003.
Yeah. So I got saved in 96, and then I came on staff in 2003. And that was just through, I had been teaching like 9th grade boys for a couple years, which nobody wants to do. And they thought that went well. And then I ended up getting, they offered an opportunity. So I got interviewed, and a guy with a master's in divinity who was down to us too. And I have no college, no religious background, got saved 7 years before that, and they hired me. So at the age of 37, I became a youth pastor, which at the time, Pastor John was like, most guys are leaving youth ministry at 37.
Right.
And I was walking in.
So you're walking in, and then I walk in. And at first we kind of had, I don't know, I don't think that we had any like necessarily bad blood. Maybe we did. I think I had an attitude, or I don't know. I wanted to be, so I came in under the idea that like I wasn't going to be there very long.
Right.
And that was a little bit of unfair, but I told everybody that I was going to start a church. And so it was kind of like, okay, we're going to put Joel over here.
Yep.
And then, but I wanted to be over here and over here. So when I think I tried to like get more involved, but there was a little bit of resistance because I was on the clock.
Right.
I was going to leave.
Well, we just led differently. You know, you had a lot of young life background and you build a lot of experiences out of that kind of thing. I was terrible at game time and stuff. And I was, you know, I think what you would have said, it's just too heavy.
Sure.
You know, it's
maybe.
too deep, man.
I don't know.
And so, you know, that was the way I was built.
Yeah.
I think probably because that's the way I feel inside. So, you know, I want that experience for the students and their ability to grow spiritually. So yeah, I think we butted heads because, you know, I know you wanted to say and kind of that stuff. But it was fine. I mean, but you know, we did end up in the executive pastor's office. You remember? You remember this? So Joel and I ended up in a meeting with the senior pastor, the executive pastor, and the discipleship pastor, and PK, Keith, and John.
Yeah, I'm still. I can't remember. This is
so we're sitting in this meeting, and here's the thing: it's just Joel and I. We were like oil and water when it came to ministry, but we kind of like enjoyed our sandpaper. It was fine. Like it didn't bother me. We could be jerks to each other, and it was fine. You know, if we needed to do office supply shopping at Target, he was my running buddy. So I mean, we had our own thing. Yeah. But there was enough friction from the way it felt to staff that they just felt like they had to heal it. And so we ended up in a meeting. We ended up in a meeting in past BJ's office, and you know, Keith kind of moderated it. He gets Keith's talent, and basically they just made us talk nice about each other. Like they were like, Joel, just kind of tell us a little bit what what do you see that's good in Kenny? And then I had to do that with Joel. And I think it was more to appease staff because we were fine.
We were kind of like, we're not really that mad at each other. Like we're brothers, so we kind of fight.
We went to Catalyst together, and
was that after that?
It had to be. It had to be. I guess. I don't know. There was a lot that happened during the time, and went to Catalyst, drove to Atlanta. You argued with Tony for like 10 hours, and
dude, we argued for 10 hours about how Jeff Foxworthy can be a Christian and be a comedian.
And the funny thing is, I'm a talker, and I didn't get to say a word because Tony and Joel would fight this fight, and then Joel would say, "Well, let's just agree to disagree."
Yeah,
and there'd be like 15 seconds, and then Joel would go, "But," and then they would go off for like another 15 minutes. But I tell you, one of the most beautiful things about
I'm tired of being right.
The Catalyst Conference was great. I think the two things I remember that I like to share with that is one. I remember the shack was new, and we were wrestling with a lot of the why they were messing with theology and the shack. And you know, I think some of us have all kind of grown through. Hey, it's fiction. Let's just move on. And we did that. And the other thing was, and I think you might remember this, but I just always thought you were. I don't want to cuss here, but let's see. You're always just a little too abrasive. Like there was no emotion in Joel, right?
Yeah.
And we were in the top of the stadium, and the Chris Tomlin group, they brought out the African Children's Choir.
Yeah.
And it was just, they came out, these little 12-year-old, 10-year-old kids singing worship. And I'm moved, and I hear this, and I look over, and Joel is on the verge of sobbing. And I'm like, oh, look at that.
There's a real heart in there somewhere.
Yeah, and I think to me, I almost feel like that was the beginning of our intimacy and friendship, because maybe you'll allude to this, but you know, once you left Jersey and you started to launch this, then I became kind of a bouncing off pad of somebody that could be objective, that wasn't emotionally involved. And I think a lot of that stemmed from that. Like I can tell Kenny whatever I want, and it's not going to be held against me, and we can kind of walk through it, and that'll be helpful.
No, that was a special moment. I think it's just like, you know, pride and whatever and jobs and things can get in the way, but we've always just been friends. Like we just really, I think we just like each other. It's just funny the way I don't know. It's weird.
No, it is.
There's just kinship that way. I do feel like you're like a brother, kind of like a dad, kind of like a brother.
It all started, and we started this with the Buckeyes. I don't know where.
So the Buckeyes. So now that's kind of like we're like Buckeye friends. Like that's like what we do. Like we, you know, since the past 2.5 years of this craziness of not being able to go anywhere. Every Buckeye game, we're just texting each other. It's almost like a tick for me now. I'm like, why didn't he tackle him? I mean, whatever.
But Joel's the eternal optimist. So
that's
like
what it is.
I'm like the pessimist. I'm a Vikings fan, so we're like always
ready for the worst.
We're always bad enough to not make the Super Bowl. We're always good enough to never tear it all down. So we sit in this this pessimistic kind of martyrdom.
Kirk Cousins. That's what it is.
Yeah. So now
that's the epitome of
great.
Well, he's good enough to not go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, maybe we have a defense, but
we'll see.
But so when the Buckeyes just have a bad moment, I'm like, I have the Vikings, doomsday personality. And Joel's like, it's fine.
We're fine.
Wait till the second half.
We're fine. They'll adjust.
Yeah, except the Michigan game this year, it's been fine.
Yeah, no, and I mean, so that's the way I am with those games. I'm like, man, like they're gonna square this away. And you immediately, it's interesting because when you talk about kind of what started you down the path of when you talk about drugs, like what you said to me, and obviously you're mature and you don't have that type of intensity there, but you do have like kind of an anxiety. You've healed in a lot of ways, but like you immediately it'll be like, our linebackers are so slow. I mean, like we can't even do it.
I've been saying that for years.
I know. I was just like, wait a minute. Like, hold on here. We still have some of the fastest guys in the world. Let's see what happens.
One of my board members, he actually calls this, because one of our core values of what we're going to talk about is optimism.
Yeah.
And he says, like, you're the most optimistic overthinker I've ever met in my life. So you have this optimistic, but you have this, I'm processing way too much information and causing myself emotional damage.
Yes.
So there's I try to bring the best, but I think the worst sometimes.
Yeah. No, I don't know, man. It's fun. So we do that. We, and with the not just football, but basketball.
Yeah, we've had a great time with
definitely love college basketball. I definitely love, I mean, in a way, in the past 2-3 years, our basketball team, I don't know. It's like I enjoy it so much because you can get into it and it matters. Every game matters. The Buckeyes are like right there. They're like right on the bubble. They're always like fighting. They beat Duke this year.
Not good enough to win it all, but not not bad enough to win it all. Not good enough to whatever.
Thad Matta, those years
can't
were
tear
great.
it all down because they're just enough. There's enough hope that we're going to keep trying.
I know, man. And I don't know. I mean, and some of these players, like, and sometimes you see them. And they are so good. They have so much potential. So who's EJ?
Yeah, EJ
Liddell. I mean, like Big Ten and Malachi Branham. I mean, like those guys. You're like, oh my gosh, these guys are so good. And they have these games. They score 30 points, and you're like, we're going to go all the way. And then they do, whatever.
Well, then you get selfish. You're like, Malachi, just don't be that good.
Don't be that good.
Because
now he's gone.
Yeah, he's
gone. Anyway, that's always fun. So
sorry for all these people who hate sports.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, it is though. That is like our like, and now hopefully we can spend some more like normal time together. But like, it's been kind of nice to like always have that go-to.
And my sports buff kid, moved out, a few years ago. So I don't really have that with them. So you're kind of my guy.
Yeah. And I mean, Katie doesn't like sit and watch the games.
Oh yeah. I don't have that. It's me and you.
Yeah, it's me and you. I know. She's like, what did Kenny say? Like she'll walk by and Michigan scores a touchdown or someone scores and she's like, oh boy, what did Kenny say? I'm like, he just flipped me off. It's fun. So Kenny, we have that story, and then I moved on and started the church, and then God got a hold of you to do something different.
Yep.
And just tell everybody the story, and it's kind of how you became a partner, at least the whole track.
I think what's kind of cool too is I tell the story is it's one of those things where I think when I first think I was going to tell Joel, that I just really felt like he'd be like, dude, that's crazy and stupid. And I didn't get that at all, which not to say it wasn't surprising, but at the same time, I also feel like you're always really gifted at pushback in a way that's healthy and helpful. I think one of the ways, this doesn't tell that story, but when we were on staff at that old church, I had an incident with 3 students that was just overwhelming me and I couldn't manage.
Yeah,
and Joel
I vaguely remember this.
And just kind of like played mediator.
Sure.
And so I've just kind of seen that in you. So that, thank you for being an affirmer. But no, as Joel knows that there were some experiences I had on staff at Jersey where I took kids all over the world, Cambodia, Africa. Katie went with me in Africa. Yeah. And, I just continued to see experiences. Lesotho, that's right. To really, maybe do something different than I was doing on staff. I mean, I love the gospel. Evangelism is not my gift set. Definitely servanthood is. And the more I was there, the more I wrestle with that. After I came back from Africa, I know that Lori always says the man who got on the plane and never returned. And
that trip.
Yep, that 2008. And I didn't leave Jersey until 2013. And so 2008, about 2010, I remember Lori coming to me and saying, hey, if you ever need to leave the church, I'm at peace with that. Not like church, but the job.
Yeah.
And I was like, what does that mean? She goes, she was already discerning like the unsettledness in my soul.
Knew.
And she said, I'm just telling you, when that time comes, you won't have to come home and convince me because I already know. And I'm like, okay. And a couple years later, we went to
It's like, that's a little chicken and egg.
Yeah, just like, what is that? Like,
it's like, is she planting the seed, or is she?
Well, the other thing too is, you know how much I love students. I'm still here at Jersey, like, leading ninth grade boys, and for some reason they still listen to me. So there's something in that that's really important to me. Yeah. So just to
you mean you're here? I think it's important. You lead a small group at this church.
Yeah, now I lead a small group.
But
here.
at that time, she came to you, and you were still doing that.
The youth guy, and it's just kind of like these 300 kids are everything. Like, why would I leave this? So, but I started to wrestle and started confessing to the children's pastor and talking about some stuff. And Lori and I went to a Donald Miller conference, and it was about story, building your life story, creating an inciting incident to change and what would be end result. And I don't know what all of that was going to tell me. I just remember telling Lori at dinner, she's like, what do you think? And I said, I think I'm supposed to leave the church without a plan. And she said, yeah, I'm not feeling that.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
But I'm with you 100%, but whatever that is.
Right.
And so that was like May. We came back to church, and all kinds of things started to fall into place for my next level trajectory in that church. Promotion, and did a Cambodia trip. I did a trip to Savannah, Georgia. And then I think it was a year. I don't know. We did a lot of trips. But that was like June, July was happening, and then August, nothing changed. Like, I didn't get was supposed to be potential promotion, and my life just spiritually bottomed out. And I remember in September, I just got this super overwhelming spiritual experience where God said, you told her in May exactly what you're supposed to do. So like, you're miserable because you're living in this holy disobedience that just like you confessed, I need to move on without a plan. And so I started to make a plan and with really no plan. Right. And in September of that year, I went to Nashville and dreamed with some people, and eventually met with some organizations that what the Roosevelt does support now. And then the other youth pastor left at the end of that year, at the end of 2012, and was like, well, that sucks because I'm getting ready to leave, but nobody knows.
Eric?
Yeah. And so I resigned not long after that, and they were going through their whole vision change, color, font, theme, mission statement. And they're like, hey, can you stay on a few months? And I'm like, yeah, I don't have a plan. So I'll be glad to stay and try to figure that out. And it got to be about May of the next year. And I remember I live in
now 14.
Yeah, 13. That's 13.
So, but May of
13.
Now, so 12 to 13.
So I remember there was a this is a funny story. We were driving through Pickerington where we live, and there was an old CC's Pizza that went out of business. And I was like,
the buffet.
And I said, well, we should start a coffee shop in that. And Lori's like, you're not leaving the church to start a coffee shop. And that was like in the fall. Now we're in May, and she's like, I don't really care what you do, just go do it. And I'd been meeting with I'd had a dream team listed for a long time, people like yourself, and probably about 15, 20 core people that I was like, if I do something stupid, I wanted to talk to these people.
Yeah.
And I'd been meeting with about 6 or 7 of them, and eventually we made this decision, kind of with my guidance, I guess, that let's start a nonprofit coffee house that funds organizations fighting the injustices of hunger, unclean water, and human trafficking. And that was May. I left the church in July. And in August, I started to birth all of that out. So, it was like build a nonprofit, get status, get a board, find a building, learn coffee, raise money. And so from August of 2013 to July or April of 2015, that's what I did. And in April 2015, we opened the Roosevelt Coffee House, which is a nonprofit that funds the things that I discussed there.
So why? Just tell everybody what I told the church on Sunday. I did a little announcement about the Roosevelt, and I always talk about it like it was the inspiration around the concept was the 1-to-1 Tom's thing. Buy one, give one.
Sure. I think what it's become more is, let's use coffee as a commodity by which we can make impact.
Yeah.
So why was just back around the time we were hanging out, Invisible Children was massive, right? And I hosted like every film screening they had for years.
Tell everybody what that is, because
so Invisible Children was these three dudes from San Diego who went to the Congo in Africa, and they were just going to film like Africa Trip, and then they ended up engaging this kid named Jacob. What they found out was a night commuter, and basically what that meant is that all these kids would commute at night to a public environment to avoid being kidnapped and turned into child soldiers. Mm-hmm. And so they started doing this whole documentary on the evilness of Joseph Kony, who created this LRA army, and the plight of these children. And so they would just do these events, and they built a really big following through their film work. I mean, so their 70% of the budget was on media, and people who would critique that was like, well, you can't do that. But it's like everybody knew what it was because of that.
Now that was like in like 09.
Yeah, so 06 it kind of took off, and 09.
Yeah, because I was still there.
The Killer song was on that one video, and then 2012 was when the Joseph Kony thing really came to fruition. And then, just long story short, the organization had a lot of problems, and they drove all of the work back to Africa, and it worked out great. So, but that justice thing of like
it was a big of go to justice, because that's what I want you to talk about. But it was like that was also like the boom of YouTube,
right? They had the most watched YouTube video of all time, and it was interesting because they'd been working so hard for 6 years that the overnight success just blew their minds.
Yeah, right.
But so even like at Jersey, there was like these kids that were kidnapped in Africa had to walk miles and miles. And so we actually did an event where we walked from Jersey all the way to Ohio State University. So 80 kids for like 8 hours. And then the whole model was they did this in every city with Invisible Children, and you had to be rescued by a media personality or a politician. And that was kind of the goal. Like somebody recognized what it was. And so we went to the soccer fields on West Campus with like hundreds of other people and slept on that and slept outside overnight. And then I think Kilbride at the time came out, recognized what we were doing, and they did that in every city. So that was the kind of thing.
I remember that.
But the reason, like I mentioned that, is like you could talk about all 10 years Kenny was at Jersey, and the kids probably will remember mission trip experiences, and they'll remember I walked 25 miles for Invisible Children. Why'd you walk 25 miles? Because this is what happened to those kids. Those kind of moments. Like there's 27 million people enslaved at the time when I was on staff. So we made our kids do an overnight event where they had to stand for 27 hours. Mm-hmm. And so they couldn't sit, they couldn't sleep. But every kid that did that experience, we could go back and say, hey, why did you stand for 27 hours?
Yeah, right.
And they'd be like, because 27 people were enslaved and we were bringing recognition to the injustice of that was. So all of that stuff spoke to me. I saw, hunger at the worst level possible in Lesotho. Cambodia is a human trafficking mecca. So we just saw all kinds of, orphans and situations that had been rescued and were being restored. And there was a lot of places that we just avoided because of how dangerous they could be. So those things really spoke to me. I'd worked with a couple clean water organizations. So what I think when we launched, I think what I was trying to do is create a coffee commodity that can make change in these areas, but also choose areas that would not be controversial in regard, meaning everybody can probably agree nobody should die of preventative of waterborne diseases, nobody should die of hunger or starve, and nobody should lack freedom. So those were like non-divisive and, could cross all aisles, spiritually, non-spiritually, whatever it might be. And then when we launched the shop and that was the vision and we got some media coverage, it worked.
Yeah.
People completely connected.
So when you were conceptualizing this and putting together your heart for this, was there pushback? Like, I kind of vaguely remember there being, at the time, I think one of the buzzwords was like the social justice movement. Oh yeah. And in the evangelical church, there was a little bit of a problem with that, or
I think my personality in the church had already kind of won that battle. I think, people understood what that looked like for me, and it wasn't an interrupter of the gospel. But I know what you're saying. I also would say, though, the first media coverage we got, they called it a social justice coffee shop, and that got some bad response, just because it didn't. So we ended up saying, hey, we're a nonprofit coffee shop. That funds organizations and does these things. And one of the things that's occurred that is not measurable, and we'll talk a little bit about measurables, but is that, the Roosevelt Coffee House and now Roosevelt Coffee Roasters, it is the incubator of social enterprise development in the city. I mean, I was there this morning. Two friends of mine, city attorney Zach Klein was there. Franklin County Treasurer Cheryl Brooks was there. City Council President Shannon Hardin's in there 2 or 3 times a week.
You were a pace setter in terms of creating nonprofit enterprise.
I think that Roosevelt definitely was, and then it became this place where it's. I have a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and he's always like, I have all my meetings at the Roosevelt because all the important people who say they don't have time to meet with me are there, and I get 5 minutes of their time without having to schedule them.
Well,
but
nice.
We see a lot of that, and I mention that because I know there's a lot of measurables in the church that don't necessarily talk about, if I pastor a wedding this year from a kid I had in middle school, that is so beautiful, but that's not a measurable.
Sure.
It's 15 years later, right?
Right.
And so same thing at the Roosevelt. We're people want to measure with our impact in giving and how many people are affected and what organizations we're working with, which is all important and should be measured and talked about. But
lots of intangibles.
But the intangibles of the city council president meeting with, for a while he's meeting with the woman named Aslan Rodriguez, who started a thing called Empower Bus, which was basically a bus system to bus new immigrants to jobs. Like if they lived in Franklinton, they could get transportation to Marysville, and created this whole nonprofit to create this opportunity for things to change for people like that. So those are the immeasurables that just blow my mind. I was meeting today with the CEO of the Furniture Bank of Ohio, who's just a super good friend of mine.
Wow.
Just from the coffee experience, and we were just kind of catching up. He was an executive Habitat for Humanity and just moved over, and we just talked about leadership roles, and we just moved into a new roaster place, so he was checking that out.
So you guys, you have 2 storefronts?
Yeah, so we launched in April 2015. It went well, and then 2019 we launched.
And that's on...
It's at 300 East Long Street, corner 6th and Long. And then in 2019, we opened our second location in Franklinton.
Perfect timing.
And right. And then in 2018, we licensed our brand. So there's a Roosevelt inside the Olentangy River Brewing Company in Lewis Center.
Right.
So kind of like a Starbucks and a Target. We're actually in dialogue with a co-working firm coming to town from Georgia that we might end up doing similar stuff with.
Nice.
And then we started roasting our own coffee in the fall of 2018, and that entity, is thriving. Have probably 60, 70 wholesale accounts.
Wow.
Obviously we do church coffee here. We do several churches. And that's been kind of an incredible experience. So ultimately,
how does the business work? I mean, what percentage of purchases go to these entities?
Yeah, so we don't play that game. So
okay, sorry, I'm asking genuinely. Out of ignorance.
We still, I would say it's a little arbitrary. Still, it's just kind of like, hey, we're going to be as aggressive and as generous as we can be, and we just don't, because the numbers
don't set yourself up. You got to make sure it's viable, and then you.
And we have made some choices that probably aren't wise in regards to viability, but we have done it, So, I mean, meaning like the first 3 weeks we were open, we ended up the third week donating $400 to Salvation Army for a human trafficking initiative that's happening, which is really cool, just because of what Emma and Tony are doing right now. And they have a similar experience where they're housing somebody that experienced something and ended up in that same space.
Yeah, right.
So in 7 years, we're pushing 7 years. We just did 7 years in April. We have given over $200,000 away. We have put money in blood water mission for wells in Africa to thousands of meals at Faith Mission Ohio and Columbus. We work with even in the pandemic, we made some really aggressive decisions for about 3 months at the roaster. For every bag of coffee we sold, we donated one to medical professionals that were dealing with COVID directly. And we ended up donating almost $20,000 of coffee during that time. So we've impacted over 60,000 people with that $200,000. And then, to the mission, especially at the new shop, it's just painted on the walls and a big, huge mission statement.
That's in Franklinton.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
In that,
I've been there.
we've, now we are probably almost at 1 million people have walked in our doors in 7 years.
Wow.
So that's another one of those intangibles. Like one of the victories I always say is like these people that come in, they fall in love with our staff, they fall in love with our coffee, and then one day they look up and they see a mission statement and they're like, what is that?
There's more going on.
And I've already won them, right? I've already got them for our quality of product and the quality of their experience. And now they see the mission, and now everything's I'm never losing that guy.
Well, so much to say. You did it right, because I was a part of, or at least privy to, a couple people. There were some movements in the late 90s and the early 2000s of just making a Christian coffee shop. And the idea was crappy coffee, crappy environment, crappy music, crappy chairs. Everything sucks, but we're going to bring people in and tell them about Jesus. But none of them worked because the environments weren't nice,
right.
And the product wasn't nice. So it's like, how does that reflect God, and are you effective just at a minimal? You don't really need to tell everyone about Jesus. You could just make a really good cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying you don't take it the wrong way. We need to tell everyone about Jesus. We all agree.
No, I think my model is not bait and switch.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not there to share the gospel.
Right,
and I've lost board members and honestly old Christian support because that's not our model.
Because you don't just
never our model.
Your model is to do mission, to support these things where you're helping people in these amazing places with these very, very difficult needs. And as a reflection, though, of your heart for the gospel, the kingdom of God.
Right.
I mean, that's what it's about.
Like Scott Harrison in Charity Water always says this. He says, I am not faith-based. I am inspired by my faith to do what I do.
Right. And I think that can sound like whatever, just like rhetoric or verbiage, but I think it makes a difference, because I really think that should be less crossover. I think that everything that a Christian does should be kind of from the place of being like their creator and making the world great. And if you just were like, I just love coffee and I want to make it great and I want to be a great roaster, and you're a man of faith, like that alone is just amazing. Like why not? So, but the fact that, dude, I just had to tell you, I'm proud of you.
Thanks, man. I love you, man.
Like, dude, I mean, that makes me emotional. Like, I don't think I've heard specifically the report in a while. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think it's probably been since before the pandemic, as we're just trying to batten down the hatches.
And just like we ended up doing we average anywhere from 15 to 25,000 a year, and then the pandemic year, 2020, we exceeded 40 grand,
man,
because of just some things and some strategies that we did that we thought would be effective, and then ended up working. And we got really lucky. And I think, to speak to some of what you're saying too, I think the fear of the church in regards to some of the way that, you're talking about kingdom and the way I exhibited my faith in what I chose to do, is that they always felt like that would just mail it in, just kind of like, just be a good person and maybe somebody will notice Jesus. But if you actually take action and finish, and it becomes a picture of who you are and what you represent, then it's going to be that way. So sure, are some people just going to try to be super moral and hope somebody asks them, which is dumb. But I mean, that's great, but that's not necessarily gospel. The more, and I love sharing like numbers, but we didn't even like calculate how many were impacted the first 4 years we were open until we started to do some modeling. Yeah. So it wasn't about that. It's just like, I remember there was a guy that came in that lived at Faith Mission, and he bought a $2 cup of coffee every day. And Royce and I became friends. Yeah. And Royce ended up getting a job at Hot Chicken Takeover that works with Second Chance Employment because I knew Joe and I, the owner, are great friends. And so I directed Royce that way. Royce got that job. And, they match your pay toward toward potentially buying a car. And so like a year into that, Royce came by driving in a used sport utility saying, hey, I got a car, man, you know? And so those are like these things, these pictures of like, how do you even like, I'm not going to quantify that in an annual report, but I'm telling you, that is so awesome.
I mean, listen,
to talk about.
I think that you come from the school of thought that like the gospel is this articulation of who Jesus is and maybe sin and all the, I tend to think it's broader in the sense that there's a new king and he has started the process of new creation. And because of that, my life has been changed and I'm here to bring about the goodness of God into the world. I
Absolutely.
think, and so like, you know, again, special revelation, you start to get into the theology of it, of revealing the person of Jesus is an important aspect, obviously, of communicating a genuine faith and having a life that reflects your value system honestly. But reflecting your value system honestly, it manifests in these things that you do for changing people's lives. I mean, you know, Jesus talked about, you know, let your light shine so that people see what you do and glorify God. And so I'm proud of you. To me, like, you know, church can become, did we learn the Bible? Did we do the group? Did we pray? Did we, you know, and I'm here. I mean, like, I love all that. That's important, really important stuff. But like, I see what you're doing, and to me, that's like church. Like that's the mission of the gospel. And so it's a thrill to be a part of it. And I hope anybody listening to this is just like wanting to go online and buy some Roosevelt coffee or just go down and be down in the environments and get coffee and meet Kenny. And dude, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say this is I think that one of the things the church gets trapped into and talks about is faith, right? Have faith, you know, live faith.
Yeah.
And I think faith isn't faith until you risk.
Yeah.
The ability to. There was no landing point for me.
Yeah.
You know, Josh Dunn and I are great friends. And, you know, Josh said to me one day, he goes, my favorite part about you is like, you don't have a plan B.
Yeah.
Like this is it. And if it doesn't, you know, so I mean, I'm talking 48 years old, 4 kids, virtually 0 retirement, and walked away without a plan to launch something because I felt God was faithful enough to say, I'm ironing this out. And, you know, you got to step into it. Just like, you know, Moses let a bunch of people down the cul-de-sac, and until he stepped in, you know, the water didn't part. So all those people coming down the cul-de-sac had to be going, what are you doing, bro?
That's right.
You know, and so those moments of faith and being obedient in them, and then, you know, being desperate enough to continue to depend on something greater in myself to lead that way is the only process by which it occurred.
Sure.
And I just think sometimes we don't exercise faith.
Yeah.
We talk about it, but we don't exercise it, which in true fashion should be, he's the only way it's going to work.
Yeah. I love that. I also heard the other day Elon Musk say he doesn't have a business plan. So I think that sometimes we get a little too technical on some of these things, and like you kind of knew, like you had a burning passion and it mattered to you. And I think that matters to God. And I think if you put those two things together, a lot of stuff is going to go well. But I also, and I'm not saying it's not faith.
No.
I think that faith is a movement that you make, but you're doing it because of lots of factors. The other piece is, I think, Kenny, if you look at your life, I mean, everybody if they're just listening to you right now and they're hearing this podcast, and this is it, this is what they know of Kenny Sipes. Look at your life. Like this is your life. Like you didn't just wake up with heartburn, like, and have like a burning, like you've been on a journey of God really steering your life, and you've been faithful, I think, a lot of the time. And so I hope if someone hears that, you know, it's not some overnight success story. It's not some, you know, you were in ministry, you were doing ministry things, and then another thing came, and so it's like you were practicing your faith the whole time. What's next? What's the next thing? What else, God, do you want me to do? And I think if anybody hears you talking, they just need to know, like, if you're pursuing God, like, he's going to put like great ideas in front of you, and they don't all have to be big, but they're all going to be great to help people. Like, that's one of the things. I know we got to stop, but like, big, you know, big. It's just
subtle is where he speaks to
whatever,
us.
man. It doesn't need to be big. It needs to be great.
Yeah.
And what's great? To serve people. which is where we started. That's great. That's what glorifies God. He's up there. There's a connection between the kingdom and the cross. And if you want to be a part of that, then you want to do something great. Great doesn't mean big. Great means it's for God. Yep. Great means it helps people. Great means it brings life and justice and righteousness into the world. And you can do that with your spouse, and you can do that with your kids, and you can do that as a baseball coach, and you can do that if God says to, do better at your job. I mean, you can do that anywhere if our hearts are right. So anyway, I love you, man. I'm proud of you. And
appreciate the time.
Yeah, dude. And we have to go kind of faster today, but hopefully we will. We'll have you back again. We'll talk more. And for everybody listening, this is The Rest. And thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.